A sharp, deliberate knock shattered the afternoon quiet, echoing through the sunlit halls of Michael Carter's home, a house he had built with his own hands, brick by brick, over 40 years of sweat, sacrifice, and love. The sound was so out of place, so urgent, that for a moment Michael thought it might be a neighbor in trouble, or perhaps a delivery gone wrong. But as he wiped his hands on his old work shirt and opened the heavy oak door, the sight that greeted him was far more unsettling. There stood Vanessa, his daughter-in-law, her smile stretched too wide, her eyes glinting with a confidence that felt almost rehearsed. Beside her was a man in a crisp navy suit, briefcase in hand, his expression polite but distant. The kind of man who had seen too many living rooms, too many signatures, and too many secrets. "We just need your signature, Dad," Vanessa said, her voice honeyed but cold, as she stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The notary followed, already opening his briefcase, the metallic click of the latches echoing in the foyer. Michael's heart thudded in his chest, but he kept his face calm, his eyes steady. Even as he caught sight of the property transfer forms, Vanessa was already sliding onto the dining table. He knew this day would come. He had seen the signs, the missing mail, the strange phone calls, the way David, his only son, had started avoiding him, always with some new excuse. Michael had spent weeks piecing together the puzzle, his mind sharp despite the years, and what he found had chilled him to the bone. But he had not panicked. He had not confronted Vanessa or David. Instead, he had gathered every scrap of evidence, every suspicious document, every email that didn't add up. He had gone to the police, his hands trembling but his voice steady, and laid out the story for Officer Ramirez, who listened with a seriousness that told Misha, he was not imagining things. "Stay calm," Ramirez had said. "Let them make the first move. We'll be ready." Now, as Vanessa and the notary settled at the table, Michael's mind raced with memories of the day he and his late wife first moved in, of David's first steps on the living room rug, of every birthday, every Christmas, every moment that made this house more than just bricks and mortar. He felt the weight of betrayal pressing on his chest, but he also felt something else: resolve. He would not let Vanessa steal his home, not with a smile, not with a pen, not today. The notary cleared his throat, flipping through the documents with practiced efficiency. "If you'll just sign here, Mr. Carter, we can finalize the transfer," he said, sliding the papers across the table. Vanessa's hand hovered over the pen, her nails perfectly manicured, her smile unwavering. Michael looked at her, then at the notary, and finally at the papers. He took a slow breath, steadying himself, and forced a small, polite smile. "Of course," he said, reaching for the pen. But just as his fingers brushed the cool metal, a sudden loud knock rattled the front door. Blue and red lights flashed through the window, painting the walls in urgent color. Vanessa's face drained of color, her confidence faltering for the first time. The notary looked up, startled, his hand frozen mid-page. Michael stood, his heart pounding, but his voice calm as ever. "I think you should get that, Vanessa," he said quietly. The police had arrived, and as the tension in the room thickened, Michael allowed himself the smallest of smiles, knowing that the trap had been set, and the game was only just beginning. The air in the foyer turned electric as two uniformed officers stepped inside, their presence filling the room with a gravity that made Vanessa's practiced smile falter and the notary's hands tremble as he quietly closed his briefcase. Michael stood a little taller, feeling the weight of years and memories settle on his shoulders, but also a quiet surge of vindication. Officer Ramirez, the same man who had listened so intently to Michael's story just days before, nodded at him with a subtle look of reassurance. "Good afternoon, Mr. Carter, Ms. Vanessa Carter." Ramirez's voice was calm, but carried an authority that cut through the tension like a knife. Vanessa's eyes darted from the officers to Michael, her confidence slipping as she tried to regain control. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her tone suddenly brittle. The notary, sensing the shift, began to gather his things, mumbling about another appointment. Michael watched Vanessa closely, every detail of her body language confirming what he had suspected for weeks. He remembered the first time he felt something was off, the day a bank statement never arrived, the way Vanessa had started handling more of the household paperwork, always insisting she was just helping out. He remembered the night he overheard her on the phone, her voice low and urgent, talking about timing and signatures and making sure he doesn't suspect a thing. That night, Michael had lain awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the cold sting of betrayal settle deep in his bones. He had always prided himself on being a good judge of character, a man who could read people, but this was a new kind of pain. The officers asked Vanessa to step aside for a few questions, and as she did, Michael caught a glimpse of the fear flickering in her eyes. He almost felt sorry for her, almost wished things could have been different, but the memory of his late wife's laughter in these very rooms, the echo of his son's childhood footsteps, steeled his resolve. He would not let this house, this legacy, be stolen by deceit. As the officers spoke quietly with Vanessa, Michael's mind replayed every recent conversation, every odd look, every unexplained absence. He remembered how David, his only son, had started pulling away, always busy, always distracted, never quite meeting his father's gaze. The pain of that distance was sharp, but Michael knew he had to stay strong, for himself and for the memory of the family he once had. The notary, now visibly uncomfortable, excused himself and slipped out the door, leaving Vanessa alone with the officers and Michael. "Mr. Carter, do you have any documentation regarding your concerns?" Officer Ramirez asked, his tone gentle but firm. Michael nodded, retrieving a thick folder from the sideboard, a folder he had prepared with meticulous care. Every page a testament to his vigilance. He handed it over, watching as Ramirez and his partner flipped through the emails, the bank statements, the forged signatures. Vanessa's face paled as she realized the depth of Michael's preparation. "This is a misunderstanding," she stammered, her voice cracking. "He's confused. He's not well." But Ramirez cut her off, his expression unreadable. "We'll need to take statements from both of you. For now, no one is to sign or transfer anything." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Michael felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. He had protected his home, at least for now, but the cost was written in the lines of his face and the ache in his chest. As the officers led Vanessa to the living room for further questioning, Michael stood alone in the foyer, the house suddenly feeling both safe and unbearably empty. He looked at the family photos on the wall, smiling faces, happier times, and wondered how things had come to this. But as the sun dipped lower outside, casting long shadows across the floor, Michael knew one thing for certain: he was not done fighting. The real battle for his home, his dignity, and his family was only just beginning. The house felt cavernous and cold after the officers left, their footsteps echoing down the front walk as dusk crept in, painting the walls with long, uncertain shadows. Michael sat at his old oak desk, the folder of evidence still open beside him, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to steady his thoughts. The silence pressed in, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a sound that had always comforted him, but now seemed to mark the slow unraveling of everything he'd built. He stared at the computer screen, the cursor blinking in the corner of his email inbox, and for a moment he wondered if he was truly losing his grip, if maybe Vanessa was right and he was just an old man clinging to ghosts. But then, almost by accident, his mouse hovered over a folder he didn't recognize, buried deep in the documents, labeled with a string of numbers and letters that meant nothing to him. His heart thudded as he clicked it open, and what he found inside made his blood run cold. There were emails, dozens of them, between Vanessa and a real estate agent, discussing the sale of the house, the timing of the transfer, and how to handle Michael if he became suspicious. There were scanned copies of his own signature, pasted onto forms he'd never seen, and a spreadsheet tracking potential buyers, offers, and even a timeline for when he would be out of the picture. Michael's hands shook as he scrolled through the files, each new document a fresh wound, a confirmation of every fear he'd tried to push aside. He printed everything, the whir of the printer loud in the quiet room, and stacked the pages neatly in the folder, his resolve hardening with every sheet. He realized now that Vanessa's plan had been in motion for months, maybe longer, and that David, his own son, had either been kept in the dark or had chosen not to see what was right in front of him. The betrayal was almost too much to bear, but Michael forced himself to keep moving, to keep thinking. He remembered the advice Officer Ramirez had given him. Document everything. Don't confront her yet, let us handle it. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the evidence in his hands, and knew that he was no longer just fighting for his house. He was fighting for his dignity, his legacy, and the truth. He backed up the files to a USB drive, locked the folder in his desk, and sat back, staring at the family photos on the wall. There was his late wife, smiling in the garden she'd loved, and David as a boy, grinning with a gap-toothed smile. Michael felt a surge of grief for the family he'd lost and the one that was slipping away. But beneath it all was a growing fire, a determination not to let Vanessa's greed destroy what he had spent a lifetime building. As night fell and the house settled into uneasy silence, Michael knew that the next steps would be the hardest, but he was ready. He would not be the victim in his own story. And as he turned off the computer and locked the study door, he promised himself that no matter how dark things became, he would see this fight through to the end. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting golden stripes across the breakfast table where Michael sat, the folder of damning evidence clutched tightly in his hands. He barely touched his coffee, his mind racing with everything he'd uncovered the night before. The house felt different now, less like a sanctuary, more like a battleground. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant car door made his heart jump. He knew he couldn't wait any longer. With a deep breath, Michael gathered his things and drove to the police station, the city passing by in a blur of color and noise. The station was busy, but Officer Ramirez greeted him with a nod, ushering him into a small, windowless interview room. Michael laid out the evidence, page by page, his voice steady as he explained what he'd found. The emails, the forged signatures, the plans to sell the house. Ramirez listened intently, his eyes narrowing as he read through the documents. "You did the right thing coming to us, Mr. Carter," he said, his tone serious. "This is more than just a family dispute. This is fraud." Michael felt a strange mix of relief and dread. He wanted justice, but he also wanted his family back, the way things were before suspicion and greed had crept in. Ramirez explained the next steps. The police would open a formal investigation, gather statements, and monitor any attempts to transfer the property. "Stay calm," Ramirez advised, his voice gentle but firm. "Don't confront her directly. Let us handle it. If she tries anything, call us immediately." Michael nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. As he left the station, the city seemed sharper, the air colder. He wondered what Vanessa was doing at that very moment, if she sensed the walls closing in, or if she was already plotting her next move. The drive home was quiet, the radio off, Michael's thoughts swirling with memories of better days and fears of what was still to come. When he pulled into the driveway, he paused, staring at the house that had been his life's work. He remembered the laughter that once filled its rooms, the warmth of family dinners, the pride he felt every time he mowed the lawn or fixed a leaky faucet. Now, every memory felt tinged with loss. But Michael refused to let despair win. He would fight for his home, for his dignity, and for the truth. As he stepped inside, the phone rang, a shrill, insistent sound that made his heart skip. It was David, his son, his voice tense and uncertain. "Dad, Vanessa says you're making things up. She says you're confused. What's going on?" Michael closed his eyes, the ache in his chest deepening. He wanted to scream, to beg his son to see the truth, but he kept his voice calm. "David, I have proof. I just want you to come over. Let's talk." There was a long pause, then a quiet, "Okay." As Michael hung up, he realized the battle was no longer just about the house. It was about trust, about family, about whether the truth would be enough to heal what had been broken. The day stretched ahead, heavy with uncertainty, but Michael was ready. He would not back down. And as he looked out the window at the sun climbing higher in the sky, he knew that the fight for his home and his family was only just beginning. The sound of David's car crunching over the gravel sent a ripple of anxiety through Michael's chest, a feeling that only deepened as he watched his son step out, shoulders hunched, eyes shadowed with worry. For a moment, Michael saw the boy he'd raised, the one who used to run up the driveway with scraped knees and wild stories, before the man before him, older, distant, and caught between two worlds, took his place. David hesitated at the door, glancing back at his phone as if searching for guidance, then finally knocked, a soft, uncertain tap that barely echoed in the tense air. Michael opened the door, forcing a smile, but the warmth between them was gone, replaced by a brittle formality. "Come in, son," he said, stepping aside. David entered, his gaze flicking around the familiar living room as if seeing it for the first time. "Vanessa says you're confused, Dad." She says you're making accusations that aren't true. She's really upset." Michael's heart twisted at the words, but he kept his voice steady, gesturing to the folder on the table. "I need you to look at something, David. Please, just read it." David sat, his hands trembling slightly as he opened the folder, eyes scanning the emails, the forged signatures, the plans to sell the house. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the distant tick of the clock. Michael watched his son's face, searching for any sign of understanding, any flicker of the bond they once shared. But David's expression was unreadable, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting between the pages and his father. This can't be right," David finally whispered, his voice raw. "Vanessa wouldn't do this. She loves me. She loves this family." Michael felt a surge of anger and grief, but he swallowed it, reaching across the table to place a hand on David's. "I know this is hard, son, but you have to see what's right in front of you. I didn't want to believe it either, but the evidence is all here." David pulled his hand away, standing abruptly, pacing the room as if trying to outrun the truth. "She said you were getting forgetful, that you were making mistakes with the bills, the paperwork. She said she was just helping." Michael's voice broke, the pain of betrayal cutting deeper than he expected. "I may be old, David, but I'm not blind. I know what's happening in my own house." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. David stopped, staring at the family photos on the wall, his shoulders shaking. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he whispered. Michael wanted to reach out, to comfort his son, but the distance between them felt insurmountable. As David turned to leave, he paused at the door, his voice barely audible. "I need to talk to Vanessa." And then he was gone, leaving Michael alone in the quiet house, the weight of loss pressing down on him. He stared at the empty chair, the folder of evidence still open, and wondered if the truth would ever be enough to bring his family back. Outside, the sky darkened, thunder rumbling in the distance, a storm gathering, both inside and out. Michael knew the worst was yet to come, but he steeled himself for the fight ahead. He would not let Vanessa's lies destroy everything he had built, not without a battle. And as the first drops of rain tapped against the window, Michael promised himself he would see this through, no matter the cost. The storm outside raged through the night, wind rattling the windows and rain drumming a relentless rhythm on the roof. But inside, Michael's mind was sharper than ever, every thought focused on the next move. He barely slept, replaying David's haunted expression and Vanessa's cold confidence over and over, each memory fueling his determination. By morning, the sky was a dull grey, and Michael's resolve had crystallized into action. He gathered his folder of evidence, double-checked the USB drive with the digital files, and dialed the number Officer Ramirez had given him for legal referrals. Within hours, he found himself in the office of Evelyn Grant, a lawyer whose reputation for tenacity and integrity was well known in town. Her office was lined with law books and framed certificates, but it was her steady gaze and no-nonsense manner that reassured Michael most. He laid out his story, every detail, every document, and watched as Evelyn's eyes narrowed with focus. "You've done your homework, Mr. Carter," she said, flipping through the evidence. "This isn't just a family squabble. This is a calculated attempt at fraud. We'll need to act quickly." Michael felt a surge of hope, tempered by the ache of betrayal. Evelyn explained the legal steps. They would file an injunction to freeze any property transfers, notify the notary association about the suspicious activity, and prepare a formal complaint against Vanessa. "You need to be careful," Evelyn warned, her tone serious. "She may try to escalate things, especially if she senses you're fighting back. Don't engage her directly. Let me handle all communication from here." Michael nodded, grateful for her guidance, but the thought of more confrontation made his stomach twist. As he left the office, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the tension in his chest remained. He drove home slowly, every streetlight and passer. The days blurred together as Michael waited for the next move, each hour heavy with anticipation and the uneasy quiet of a house that felt more like a fortress than a home. He kept to Evelyn's advice, avoiding direct contact with Vanessa, but her presence lingered in every shadow, every phone call that went unanswered, every message left unread. Then, one afternoon, his phone buzzed with a new text from Vanessa. "Let's talk, just you and me, at the house, tonight." The words were simple, but Michael could feel the tension behind them, the sense that she was cornered and desperate to regain control. He hesitated, remembering Evelyn's warning, but something in his gut told him this was the moment he'd been waiting for. The chance to see Vanessa's true intentions laid bare. He called Evelyn, who listened carefully and then said, "Go, but be smart. Set up your phone to record, don't sign anything. If things get heated, walk away and call me." Michael agreed, his nerves taut as piano wire, and spent the next hour preparing. He charged his phone, checked the recording app, and even set up a small voice recorder in his jacket pocket, just in case. As dusk settled over the neighborhood, Michael drove to the house, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his mind replaying every betrayal, every moment of doubt. The house looked unchanged from the outside, but inside the air was thick with tension. Vanessa was already there, standing in the living room with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice cool but brittle. Michael nodded, keeping his distance, his phone recording in his pocket. "What do you want, Vanessa?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. She launched into a rehearsed speech about family, about misunderstandings, about how all of this could go away if he would just sign the transfer papers. Michael listened, letting her talk, watching her carefully. Then, as she grew more agitated, her words slipped. She admitted to forging his signature, to contacting the notary behind his back, to planning the sale before David even knew. Michael's heart pounded, but he kept his face neutral, letting the recorder capture every word. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Michael," Vanessa snapped, her mask slipping. You're old. You don't need this house. Why not just let it go?" The cruelty in her voice stung, but Michael stood his ground. "This house is my life's work. I won't let you steal it." Vanessa's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Michael saw the desperation behind her bravado. She tried one last time, pushing the papers toward him, but he refused to touch them. "I know what you've done, Vanessa, and so do the police." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Vanessa's face went pale, her confidence crumbling. Michael turned and walked out, his heart racing, the recording safe in his pocket. As he stepped into the cool night air, he felt a surge of relief and triumph. He had the proof he needed, and for the first time, Vanessa knew she was caught. The battle was far from over, but Michael had turned the tables. The next move was his. The next morning dawned grey and heavy, the kind of sky that seemed to press down on the world, making every breath feel weighted. Michael barely slept, replaying the recording over and over, each word from Vanessa a fresh reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything. He called Evelyn as soon as the sun crested the rooftops, his voice steady but urgent. "I have it," he said simply, and she didn't need to ask what he meant. Within the hour they met at her office, the recording playing out in the quiet room, Vanessa's confession echoing off the walls. Evelyn's eyes flashed with satisfaction. "This is it, Michael. This is the nail in her coffin." Together they compiled the evidence, emails, forged documents, the audio file, and prepared a formal submission for the police and the court. Evelyn's confidence was contagious, and for the first time in weeks, Michael felt the weight on his chest begin to lift. But as they finalized the paperwork, Evelyn's phone buzzed with a new message. She read it, her brow furrowing. "Vanessa's lawyer just filed an emergency motion. She's trying to force a transfer of the house, claiming you're mentally unfit." The words hit Michael like a punch. He'd expected desperation, but not this. "She's going to try to have you declared incompetent," Evelyn explained, her voice low. "It's a last-ditch move, but it can get messy. We need to act fast." Michael nodded, his resolve hardening. "Let's do it." They rushed to the courthouse, the city blurring past the car windows, every red light a test of Michael's patience. Inside, the halls buzzed with activity, but Evelyn cut through the chaos with practiced authority, filing their evidence and requesting an immediate hearing. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, agreed to see them that afternoon. As they waited, Michael's phone vibrated with a call from David. He hesitated, then answered, "Gushki," his son's voice tight with worry. "Dad, Vanessa says you're trying to ruin us. She says you're sick. I don't know what to believe." Michael's heart ached, but he spoke quietly. "Just come to the courthouse, David. Please, you need to hear the truth." The line went silent, then David agreed. The hearing was tense, Vanessa arriving with her lawyer, her face pale but defiant. She repeated her claims, painting Michael as confused, forgetful, and unstable. But when Evelyn played the recording, the courtroom fell silent. Vanessa's voice, clear and cold, admitting to forgery and deceit, echoed through the chamber. The judge's expression hardened. "Ms. Carter, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Vanessa stammered, her composure crumbling. But the damage was done. David sat in the back, his face ashen, the truth finally undeniable. The judge ordered an immediate halt to any property transfer and scheduled a full trial, warning Vanessa that criminal charges were likely. As the hearing ended, Michael caught David's eye, searching for some sign of forgiveness, some bridge back to the son he loved. David looked away, torn and broken, but Michael knew the truth was finally out. As he left the courthouse, the air felt lighter, the sky a little brighter. The confrontation was over, but the war for his home and his family was far from finished. Still, for the first time, Michael felt hope flicker in his chest. He had stood his ground, and the world had listened. The days that followed the hearing moved with a strange, suspended tension, as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for the next blow to fall. Michael tried to keep busy, tending the garden his late wife had loved, fixing a loose shutter, anything to keep his hands from shaking and his mind from spiraling. But every time the phone rang or a car slowed outside, his heart leapt in his chest. He knew the police were working behind the scenes, building their case, but the waiting gnawed at him. Then one afternoon, as he was pruning the rose bushes by the front walk, a pair of police cruisers rolled quietly up the street, their blue lights flashing in the pale sunlight. Michael straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans, and watched as Officer Ramirez and two other officers stepped out, their faces set with purpose. Vanessa's car was already in the driveway. She'd come to collect some things, or so she'd claimed in a terse text to David. Michael stood back, heart pounding, as the officers approached the door. He could hear voices inside, Vanessa's sharp and defensive, David's low and pleading. The officers knocked, firm and official, and the house seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa opened the door, her face a mask of annoyance that quickly melted into shock as she saw the uniforms. "Ms. Carter, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud, forgery, and attempted theft," Ramirez announced, his voice calm but unyielding. For a moment, Vanessa looked as if she might run, but the officers moved quickly, reading her rights as they handcuffed her in the entryway she'd once tried to claim as her own. David stood frozen, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief and heartbreak. "Dad? What's happening?" he whispered. But Michael could only shake his head, the words caught in his throat. The neighbors watched from behind curtains, the quiet street alive with whispers and speculation. Vanessa, her bravado gone, pleaded with David, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that Michael had set her up. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the officers unmoved. As they led her to the cruiser, Vanessa shot Michael a look of pure venom, but he met her gaze with quiet resolve. He felt no triumph, only a deep, aching sadness for what had been lost. The house, once filled with laughter and love, now echoed with the consequences of greed and betrayal. After the police left, David sat on the front steps, his head in his hands, the weight of everything crashing down on him. Michael sat beside him, the silence between them heavy but honest. "I'm sorry, Dad," David finally choked out, tears streaking his face. Michael put a hand on his son's shoulder, the gesture small but full of forgiveness. "We'll get through this," he said softly, though he wasn't sure what this even meant anymore. As the sun set behind the house, casting long shadows across the lawn, Michael knew the hardest part was still ahead, rebuilding trust, healing wounds, and finding a way forward. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. Justice had been served, and the truth had finally come to light. The fight for his home was not over, but Michael was no longer alone. The courthouse loomed large and impersonal, its stone facade cold against the bright morning sun. As Michael walked up the steps, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation, the low hum of voices and the shuffle of papers echoing off marble floors. Michael sat at the plaintiff's table beside Evelyn, her presence a steady anchor in the storm of his nerves. Across the aisle, Vanessa sat with her lawyer, her face pale but defiant, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. David was there too, sitting alone in the back row, his expression haunted, torn between loyalty and truth. The judge entered, her gavel striking the bench with a sharp crack that silenced the room. The trial began with opening statements, Vanessa's lawyer painting Michael as a confused old man, vulnerable to paranoia and memory lapses, while Evelyn countered with calm, precise facts, laying out the evidence of fraud and forgery. Michael listened, his hands clenched in his lap, every word a reminder of how much was at stake, not just his house, but his dignity, his legacy, and the fragile threads of family that still remained. When it was his turn to testify, Michael stood, his knees trembling but his voice steady. He told the story of his home, of the years spent building it, of the love and laughter that once filled its rooms. He described the first signs of betrayal, the missing mail, the strange phone calls, the growing distance with David. He spoke of the night he found the hidden folder, the shock of seeing his own signature forged, the heartbreak of realizing the woman he'd welcomed into his family had plotted against him. Evelyn guided him through the evidence, each document projected on a screen for the court to see. The emails, the bank records, the audio recording of Vanessa's confession. The room was silent, every eye fixed on Michael as he recounted the pain of being doubted by his own son, the loneliness of fighting for the truth. Vanessa's lawyer tried to rattle him, questioning his memory, his motives, but Michael stood firm, his answers clear and unwavering. "I may be old," he said, his voice ringing out, "but I know what's right, I know what's mine. And I know when I've been betrayed." The judge watched him closely, her expression unreadable, but Michael felt a sense of release, as if a weight he'd carried for months was finally lifting. When Vanessa took the stand, her story unraveled under cross-examination, her lies exposed by the mountain of evidence. She broke down, her tears genuine or not, Michael couldn't tell, but the damage was done. As the trial drew to a close, Evelyn delivered a final, powerful argument, reminding the court that justice was not just about property, but about trust, about the sanctity of family, and the courage it takes to stand up for what is right. The judge called a recess and Michael stepped outside, the cool air filling his lungs, his heart pounding with hope and fear. The verdict was coming, and with it the chance for closure or the risk of losing everything. But whatever happened next, Michael knew he had fought with honor, and that in itself was a victory. The courtroom was silent, every breath held as the judge returned to her bench, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Michael sat rigid, his hands folded tightly in his lap, Evelyn beside him with a reassuring nod, while Vanessa stared straight ahead, her face drained of color, her lawyer whispering last-minute reassurances that sounded hollow even from across the aisle. David sat in the gallery, his eyes red-rimmed, his posture slumped, as if the outcome would either shatter him or finally set him free. The judge's gaze swept the room, her voice calm but commanding as she began to speak. "This case is not just about property, but about trust, about the bonds of family and the consequences of betrayal," she said, her words echoing in the stillness. She recounted the evidence, the forged signatures, the secret emails, the audio recording of Vanessa's own confession. She acknowledged Michael's clarity, his preparation, and his unwavering pursuit of the truth, even as his world unraveled around him. "The court finds the evidence of fraud and forgery overwhelming," the judge declared, her tone final. "The attempted transfer of the property is void. Full ownership and all rights to the house remain with Mr. Michael Carter." A collective exhale swept through the room, relief and disbelief mingling in the air. Vanessa's lawyer slumped in defeat, while Vanessa herself seemed to shrink, her bravado gone, replaced by a stunned, hollow silence. The judge continued, her voice growing even more serious. Furthermore, the court refers Ms. Vanessa Carter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution on charges of fraud and forgery. The words landed like a hammer, and for a moment Vanessa looked as if she might faint, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the table. Michael felt a wave of emotion crash over him. Relief, vindication, sorrow, and a bittersweet sense of justice. He glanced back at David, who met his eyes for the first time in weeks, a silent apology passing between them, raw and real. Evelyn squeezed Michael's shoulder, her smile small but proud. The judge banged her gavel, signaling the end, and the courtroom erupted in a low murmur of voices, reporters scribbling notes, neighbors whispering, the story already spreading beyond those four walls. Michael stood slowly, his legs unsteady, but his spirit lighter than it had been in months. He had fought for his home, for his name, for the truth, and he had won. As he left the courtroom, the sun was shining, the world outside bright and alive, and for the first time in a long while, Michael allowed himself to hope that healing was possible, that the future could still hold peace. But as he walked down the courthouse steps, he knew the journey was not over. There were wounds to mend, trust to rebuild, and a family to salvage from the wreckage of betrayal. Still, with the verdict behind him and the truth finally recognized, Michael felt ready to begin again. The courthouse victory felt surreal as Michael stepped back into his home, the familiar creak of the floorboards echoing in the quiet, each sound a reminder of both what he had saved and what he had lost. The house was his again. Legally, undeniably, but it felt emptier than ever. The silence heavy with memories and the ghosts of laughter that once filled every room. He wandered from room to room, touching the banister he'd sanded by hand, pausing at the kitchen window where his late wife used to hum while making tea, and finally settling in the living room where the afternoon sun painted golden rectangles on the faded rug. The folder of evidence, now just a relic of a battle hard fought, sat on the coffee table, a silent testament to the months of fear, suspicion, and resolve that had consumed him. Michael sat heavily in his favorite chair, exhaustion washing over him, the adrenaline of the courtroom replaced by a deep, aching fatigue. He thought of Vanessa, now facing criminal charges, and wondered if she'd ever truly understood the pain she'd caused, or if she'd only ever seen the house as a prize to be won. He thought of David, whose absence was a sharper wound than any legal threat, and wondered if their relationship could ever be repaired. The phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. It was David, his voice hesitant, almost childlike. "Dad, can I come over?" Michael's heart leapt and ached at once. "Of course, son. Any time." When David arrived, he stood awkwardly in the doorway, eyes downcast, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered, voice thick with regret. "I should have listened. I should have trusted you." Michael stood, crossing the room to embrace his son, the hug awkward at first, then fierce, both men clinging to the hope that forgiveness was possible. They talked for hours, the conversation raw and honest, peeling back layers of hurt and misunderstanding. David admitted how lost he'd felt, how Vanessa's manipulation had blinded him, how ashamed he was for doubting his own father. Michael listened, his anger softened by the relief of having his son back, even if the road ahead would be long. As dusk settled outside, they sat together in the quiet, the house no longer feeling quite so empty. Michael knew there would be more hard days, more difficult conversations, but for the first time since the ordeal began, he felt a glimmer of peace. The house was safe, his name was cleared, and the first fragile threads of family were being rewoven. As he watched the lights of the city flicker on in the distance, Michael realized that victory wasn't just about keeping the house. It was about reclaiming his life, one honest moment at a time. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, determined energy, as Michael set about restoring not just his house, but his sense of self. The legal battle had left scars, on the walls, in his heart, and in the fragile relationship with his son. But Michael refused to let those wounds define the rest of his life. He started with small things, repairing the loose banister, repainting the front door a cheerful blue, and tending to the garden his late wife had loved so much. Each task was a meditation, a way to reclaim the space from the shadows of betrayal and fill it once more with intention and care. David visited often, sometimes helping with repairs, sometimes just sitting in the kitchen with a mug of coffee, the silence between them growing less awkward with each passing day. They talked about everything, about the past, about Vanessa, about the mistakes and the lessons learned. Michael listened more than he spoke, letting David unburden himself, letting the old wounds air out in the sunlight of honesty. The neighbors, who had once whispered behind curtains, now stopped by to offer support, some bringing casseroles, others just a kind word or a handshake. Michael found himself sharing his story, not out of bitterness, but as a warning and a comfort to others who might one day face the same kind of betrayal. He even started volunteering at a local community center, speaking to seniors about protecting their assets and recognizing the signs of financial abuse. The work gave him purpose, a sense that his ordeal could help others avoid the same pain. The house, too, began to feel alive again. Michael hosted small dinners, inviting old friends and new acquaintances, filling the rooms with laughter and conversation. He hung new photos on the walls, pictures of his grandchildren, of David smiling again, of himself in the garden, hands dirty and heart lighter. The process of rebuilding was slow, sometimes painful, but it was real. Each day Michael felt a little stronger, a little more himself. He knew the past would never fully disappear, that the scars would always be there, but he also knew that healing was possible. The house was no longer just a battleground or a prize. It was a home again, a place of safety and hope. And as Michael stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the city, he realized that the greatest victory wasn't in the courtroom, but in the quiet, persistent act of choosing to begin again. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when the letter arrived, its envelope plain and official, the return address unmistakably from the county correctional facility. Michael hesitated before opening it, his hands steady but his heart uneasy, knowing that whatever words Vanessa had written would stir up old wounds he'd worked so hard to heal. He sat at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the window, and unfolded the letter with deliberate care. Vanessa's handwriting was neat, almost formal, the tone of her words both apologetic and raw. She wrote of regret, of sleepless nights spent replaying her choices. of the shame that now shadowed every memory of the family she'd tried to manipulate. She didn't ask for pity, nor did she try to justify her actions. Instead, she admitted her guilt, confessed to the greed and fear that had driven her, and asked only for Michael's forgiveness, not for her sake, but for his, so he could move forward without the weight of anger. Michael read the letter twice, then a third time, his emotions a tangled knot of resentment, sorrow, and reluctant empathy. He thought of the pain she'd caused, the trust she'd shattered, the months of suspicion and loneliness. But he also thought of the lessons learned, the strength he'd found, and the family he was slowly rebuilding. That afternoon, he called David, reading him parts of the letter, and together they talked about forgiveness, not as a gift to Vanessa, but as a way to free themselves from the past. "I don't know if I can ever forget," Michael admitted, his voice thick with emotion, "but maybe I can let go." David nodded, his own eyes shining with tears. "We have to, Dad. For us." In the days that followed, Michael wrote a reply, short, honest, and free of bitterness. He told Vanessa that he accepted her apology, that he hoped she would find her own path to redemption, and that he wished her peace. He didn't promise reconciliation, but he did promise to let go of the anger that had threatened to consume him. Sending the letter felt like closing a chapter, not with triumph, but with quiet dignity. Michael knew forgiveness wouldn't erase the past, but it would allow him to move forward, lighter and more whole. As he dropped the letter in the mailbox, he felt a sense of release, as if a long-held breath had finally been exhaled. That evening, he and David sat on the porch, watching the sky turn gold and lavender, the silence between them peaceful at last. Michael realized that true victory wasn't about winning or losing, but about finding the courage to forgive, to heal, and to hope again. The seasons turned, and with each passing month, the house that had once been a battleground slowly transformed back into a sanctuary, a place not just of memories, but of new beginnings. Michael found himself waking each morning with a sense of calm he hadn't known in years. The weight of suspicion and betrayal finally lifted from his shoulders. The garden flourished under his care, roses blooming in wild, joyful bursts, and the laughter of grandchildren once again echoed through the halls on weekends when David brought the family to visit. The wounds of the past were still there, faint scars beneath the surface, but they no longer defined the rhythm of Michael's days. He spent his time tending to the small things, fixing a squeaky hinge, baking bread for the neighbors, volunteering at the community center where his story had become a quiet inspiration for others facing their own battles. The house was filled with life. Friends gathered for dinners, old music played softly in the evenings, and the kitchen table was always set for one more. Michael and David grew closer, their conversations honest and unguarded. The trust between them rebuilt one day at a time. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, Michael would sit on the porch at sunset, a cup of tea warming his hands, and reflect on the journey that had brought him here. He thought of his late wife, of the love and laughter they'd shared, and felt her presence in the gentle breeze that rustled the leaves. He thought of Vanessa, too, not with anger, but with a kind of distant compassion, hoping she would find her own peace and redemption. The house, once threatened by greed and deceit, now stood as a testament to resilience, to the power of truth, and to the quiet strength that comes from never giving up on what matters most. As twilight deepened and the city lights flickered on in the distance, Michael smiled softly. Content in the knowledge that he had not only protected his home, but reclaimed his life. The final peace was not loud or triumphant, but gentle and enduring. A promise that, no matter how dark the storm, there is always a way back to the light. And as the stars appeared overhead, Michael knew that the future, at last, was his to shape, filled with hope, family, and the unbreakable dignity of a man who had faced the worst and emerged whole.